Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, and today we are going to talk about a story that's been in the news lately, and it's about all these murderous immigrants who are roaming the streets of America. And here to discuss it with us is the Vice President for Economic and Social Policy Studies at the Cato Institute. I should have asked him how to pronounce his last name, but I did not, so I'm going to take a crack at it and say we have with us today Alex Nowrasteh.
Hey, that's pretty close. Nowrasteh, thank you.
Nowrasteh. Okay, Alex
Yeah,
Nowrasteh.
thanks a bunch.
All right, so Alex, what sparked this story that's, seems to have gone national now? It's all over social media. The president talks about it. What instigated it?
So Representative Tony Gonzalez, who's a Republican representative from Texas, he represents a large area of the U.S.-Mexico border, sent a question to ICE asking about criminals that they're aware of who are illegal immigrants or non-citizens in the United States on their non-deportation docket. So non-detained docket. So this is a list of individuals that ICE knows about that's not in ICE custody, and ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So they run all the deportations in the United States. And then ICE sent a letter back to Tony Gonzalez with some numbers in there, but almost no explanation, almost no details. People took these numbers and tweeted them out and basically freaked out and misinterpreted them wildly, and it caused a big political firestorm.
So the basic claim is that there's 13,099 immigrants who are convicted murderers and they're on the streets of America. What is the truth?
So that's not, that is the claim. It is absolutely false. The first part is the ICE letter details what it says are non-detained migrants. And what they mean by non-detained is they're not currently in the custody of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. People like Tony Gonzalez and others read this and they thought, oh, well, that means they must be free roaming around the U.S. Well, no, non-detained just means not detained by ICE. The vast majority of these people are in prison. They are in state and local jails. They are not roaming around the country. They're just not currently in ICE detention. Now, ICE, of course, did not give us data on how many of these people are in prisons, but in previous releases of information like this that ICE has done in the past, they have made clear that most of these people are in prisons or jails. In other cases, the data go back over 40 years. So these 13,099 people, it's not like they were convicted of homicide in the last few years. Some of them go back to the 1950s. So what's clear is a lot of them are probably dead. They've died from old age or something else. They've probably left the United States on their own, and the majority of them are likely in prison.
So when I was incarcerated, you'd have guys that were not American citizens. And when they hit the end of their sentence, they would have to go to the county jail. They would not be released. They had to go to the county pending deportation. So from what I'm gathering, if these guys were convicted of murder and that was the situation, they would be counted as non-detained, even if they're still incarcerated.
That's right.
And what about guys that are still serving their sentence? Would they also be counted as non-detained?
That's right.
So as long as they're not in ICE custody, they're non-detained.
That's right.
Now, where did these murders happen? Did they all happen in America? Did they happen, wherever the immigrants came from?
Most of them probably happened in the United States, but it does include migrants who committed their murder, some of them who committed their murders overseas. Not a large percentage probably, but some of them did definitely commit their murders overseas.
Now, Trump says that these folks all came in during the Biden administration. What is the actual time frame in which they came over?
As far as we can tell, back to the 1950s.
So we've got people that have been coming in since the 50s. So it seems like not the average person, right? But your propagandists. This has to be intentional, right? I can't imagine that these people are that dumb that they don't understand this. I mean, the second I heard what you just said, that it just refers to individuals who aren't detained by ICE, I knew immediately, okay, they're very narrowly defining what it means to be not detained. And so I can't imagine that. Well, maybe politicians are that dumb. What the hell do I know? But what do you think? Do you think it's just a play to try to get votes?
I think it is mostly confusion because these government agencies are pretty complicated. They have their own terminology to define things. And if a representative like Tony Gonzalez asks ICE, how many people are not detained who are criminals, um, ICE answers the question literally. It's like a robot. It's like a very stupid robot where they just answer the question literally. And they did. And it's just the plain meaning of words that you and I have, or normal people have when they interpret it, is different than the terms that these bureaucrats use. So I think in the vast majority of cases, it is just honest confusion. Now, there may be some cases where somebody like a Stephen Miller, who used to work for Donald Trump, he knows what he's doing. I think there's no doubt that he knows what these terms are. Or some other people who work at some other anti-immigrant organizations like the Center for Immigration Studies. They know what they're doing. They know how this stuff is, how these ICE documents do not mean what President Trump, for instance, or former President Trump is saying they mean. But in the vast majority of cases, I do think it is just general confusion over these terms and what they mean. Immigration law is the second most complicated part of American law. The terms don't match up with anything else in the English language. So I do have some sympathy for people who are led astray by this, who are otherwise trying to get the facts right.
I can understand being confused, but by now it seems at least people, I mean, Elon Musk is posting this to Twitter or X, what X it's called now. He's posting it to Twitter that there's these immigrant murderers. Trump is saying it. I can't imagine that somebody in Trump's orbit hasn't told him that it's not true. And I could be. I mean, I don't know. It's just speculation, but it just
Yeah.
seems like beyond my imagination that these guys, somebody isn't correcting them and saying, listen, you're putting out false information, and they're doing it anyway. Now, I haven't been in the space arguing about immigration, but in your experience, is that something that's common, especially with politicians where they know the truth and you just mislead people anyway?
I think a lot of politicians are definitely in that category where they want to mislead people. A lot of them probably don't even know, though. It's not like necessarily intentional. They look for the talking point. They look for the thing that sounds good. And they don't really do the investigation into, well, how were these numbers calculated? What do these terms mean? They just run with it. Now, I think in a sense you can say that's dishonest and lying, right? If you run with a number, you don't know where it came from, you're saying it means something when you don't necessarily know. That's definitely like in the category of dishonesty. But do I think that they know what it really means and they're saying otherwise? I don't think in most cases they care. I don't think in most cases they know. And anybody who is an assistant to them, who's going to come up to them to tell them otherwise, probably won't last long in that job. So there's actually probably nobody around who's willing to even say that to them. So I wouldn't be surprised if nobody is told I wouldn't be surprised if assistants to Donald Trump have just not told him what's going on. He might have heard it in the media. He might have heard it in interviews when he's being interviewed by journalists. But we know what he says in those situations, right? He just doesn't take anything the journalists say seriously. I'm trying to be very generous here, by the way. I'm
Okay.
trying to really interpret it like in the best way possible. I don't like to um, assume bad intentions on the part of people I disagree with. I think there's definitely some people who are being dishonest. I just am not sure who they are. So I don't want to paint
Sure.
with too broad a brush or be too critical of any individual.
Well, that's fair. Now, you, from what I can gather from seeing your Twitter feed and reading your articles, are somewhat of a data junkie. So I'm interested to find out when it comes to crime, how do the crime rates of immigrants compare to the citizenry, both illegal immigrants and legal immigrants?
So this is a remarkably difficult question to answer. And it's difficult because in most places, most of the time, the US government does not record very detailed immigration information about people who are incarcerated or convicted. But there is one awesome state that does, and it's the state of Texas. And they record the immigration status of people convicted and arrested of crimes. And in the most recent year we have available, focusing on homicide, and we can get into why I focus on homicide, but focusing on homicide, illegal immigrants have a criminal conviction rate 36% below native-born Americans, and legal immigrants have a criminal conviction rate 63% below native-born Americans. So they are much less likely to be convicted of homicides in the US. Their chances of being arrested for a homicide are about the same, much less likely than natives, in both cases for legal and illegal immigrants. And this has been the case for as long back as we have data.
So why did you focus on murders?
So the main reason is crime is difficult to study because a lot of people are victims of crime and they don't report it when the crime happens. So like let's say you live in a city with a lot of crime and the police aren't very good and you get like $1,000 stolen from you. Are you really gonna like waste your time talking to the police about your $1,000 when they probably won't be able to do anything about it and you won't get your money back? Some people will, some people won't. So we just don't have like a great we don't know the total number of these types of crimes that have been committed for something like larceny or for rape or for assault or some of these other crimes. And then when it comes to victimless crimes, like we definitely don't know, right? Like
Yeah, of
like
course.
drugs and guns, right? So we have no idea there or prostitution. But in a crime like homicide, it is a very, very serious offense. Just about everybody reports it when they know about it happening. It is very hard to hide a body. Despite what television tells you, it is actually very hard to hide a body. And usually people notice when somebody disappears
Right.
and they report it, right? And this is something where even illegal immigrants will call the police 100, like basically 100% of the time when they think a murder is going on. Like people just don't like murder, obviously. It's the worst crime. It's the crime that imposes the highest cost on people, the victim, their families, etc. And so it's the one that we understand the best, where there's just not a lot of homicides that occur that we don't know about. So because of that, we've got just a much better pool of data to work with.
Now, what about the argument that says, okay, even if immigrants have lower murder rates and lower crime rates than natural born Americans or just, American citizens, so what? That even one murder is too much and it could have been prevented just by closing the border. Why don't you think that argument has weight?
So I don't think it works because murder is terrible no matter how it happens or where it happens, right? But if one of the government's jobs is to supply these public goods, and one of them is law enforcement, protecting life, liberty, and private property, right? From people, whether they're foreign government or domestic criminals. And so if we want to judge like an anti-crime strategy, it's going to require the government to spend some taxpayer dollars. It's going to require hiring cops, a justice system, etc. If we wanted to reduce crimes and homicides in the US, we have to figure out whether these anti-crime policies pass a cost-benefit test. If we save more lives through these policies and if that's worth the amount of money it takes to save those lives. It sounds brutal, It sounds really kind of cold to say it that way. But when you think about it from a government finances and from what's good for the United States perspective, it makes sense. If it costs $1 billion to prevent one murder, I think we all know that tragically that's not worth it, right? I wish it were, but it's not worth it. So in this case, if we want to stop murders committed by immigrants, we could just close the border and end all legal immigration. That's going to create a massive black market. It's going to stop the immigration of many millions of people who are not criminals in any way coming here, imposing enormous costs on them, imposing enormous costs on Americans who want to hire them to prevent a relatively small number of murders. And by the way, the majority of the victims of immigrant crime and immigrant homicide are other immigrants themselves. So it just doesn't work. It doesn't pass a cost benefit test. It doesn't make the United States safer because we'd have to spend even more resources than it makes sense. And as a result, we'd be a little bit less safe because of that.
So what would you favor if they came to you right now and said, you're in charge, you get whatever immigration policy you want? What would you do?
So I'd say that if you're not a violent or property criminal, if you are not a national security threat, if you don't have a serious communicable disease, you should be able to come to the United States to live, to work, and eventually, if you want to become a citizen. And that if you commit a serious felony while you are here in your meantime, a violent or property offense, if you become a national security threat, then you should be, arrested, convicted through the normal criminal justice system, serve your time, and then removed from the United States. But otherwise, people should be able to live and to work here. And if they commit a serious offense, we should judge them based on their individual actions and punish them accordingly. And I think part of that punishment should be removal from the United States.
And like, what about this footage that I see on the news where they show, I don't know, every time there's an election, it seems there's a caravan coming into the country, but there is footage of a lot of people on the border, and there's stories about the government maybe flying them in, putting them up in hotel rooms, they're overflowing cities. How do I put this? Why are the optics on that so bad? Are the optics a real representation of what it would be like if there were an actual open immigration system like you're describing?
Yeah, the optics currently are the result of an enormously controlled and restricted immigration system. The result of the controls is chaos, is a massive black market, and are all these horrible pictures and images that we see of disorder along the border. If we had a more open immigration system where it was much easier to come here legally, people would fly in, they get a plane ticket, they get a visa, they'd fly into an American city and they could get a job and start working. Currently, what they have to do is almost all of those people cannot come in legally. There is no legal way for them to do so. So they pay a smuggler $10 or $20 or $30,000. They go up to the border. They pay another smuggler to help sneak them across. They get apprehended by Border Patrol. Sometimes they rush the border in big numbers and get arrested in massive numbers. This causes chaos. They have to be detained. They have to be let go. And then they have these court dates that are years and years in advance. It causes massive amounts of chaos. The best analogy I've heard is to prohibition. The government made alcohol illegal, and very quickly there was a big black market with Al Capone, with shootouts, with gangs killing each other, murder and crime where there was none before. And then the government legalized alcohol again, and most of that went away. So this is just a great example of how making voluntary, mutually beneficial exchanges illegal causes chaos. So if we had legal immigration, if we expanded it, we wouldn't have these shocking scenes, these shocking images. I mean, one other reform I favor is building a higher wall around the welfare state. So most immigrants can't get welfare when they come into the United States. immediately. They have to be here legally on a green card for about 5 years to get welfare benefits. I say build an even higher wall. You can't get any welfare until you become a citizen. Ideally, even citizens wouldn't have access to welfare, right? I want to get rid of the welfare state. But if we can't do that, at least make it so that you can't get any until you become an American citizen. I favor that. So most of these problems you see in major cities are a result of older agreements between cities and these homeless advocacy organizations that say you have to give shelter to people that are homeless. And so as a result of that, some migrants have found this loophole and they're able to take advantage of the government supplying them with some amount of shelter. And that's a problem in some cities, but not other cities. Like you don't see this problem in places like Miami or in Houston, Texas, where they just don't have this problem because they don't have these agreements with nonprofits. You see it in places like New York and Chicago, and to a lesser extent, Los Angeles, that has some of these agreements. So I want to get rid of all that. I want to get rid of the welfare state. I want to restrict it so that only citizens have access to it. But New York and Chicago and these other cities, they made their policies. They can change these policies. They should change these policies. But that is not necessarily the problem of like the federal government. I mean, these states know what to do. These cities know what to do. They should have done it yesterday.
Speaking of welfare, there's this claim out there that FEMA money, instead of going down south to hurricane victims, is going to illegals. Is there any truth to that?
So there is a little bit like in previous years, but you're talking about a FEMA budget where a small fraction of a percent basically is going to help with immigration stuff. It's like really a fraction of a percent. So it's like tiny, tiny dollars that are going to that. So there's always like a nibble of truth in these things, right? But you're talking about like less than 1% basically going to migrant problems along the border, for instance, where some of these people are coming in illegally. That's basically where some of it is going. The big problem with FEMA is that it's a massive government bureaucracy that is not very, it doesn't respond well to changing disaster circumstances. And it's certainly not suited to the modern world where you have like fewer deadly disasters, but disasters that impose more property damage just because there's more property to be destroyed. And so it's like not a very well-run organization that's very confused. There's very little accountability and has all the problems that government agencies have in trying to allocate these resources. And frankly, even if it were like a perfect agency, I would not expect them to be able to respond perfectly to a disastrous hurricane that hit areas that are just not ever really hit by hurricanes, like Western North Carolina. Like that's freakish, the amount of damage that occurred out there, like in Western South Carolina. That's like incredible ahistorical event, right? Like the most perfect law in the books couldn't make the damage zero or the recovery efforts perfect in those areas. So we're going to see the government flat-footed. They're going to respond poorly. Private business is going to really struggle to respond too. It's going to take them a little bit of time to get in there in a big way for reconstruction. But the notion that it's like entirely blamed on migrants is ridiculous. But what is going to happen is when the rebuilding happens in those areas, migrant workers are going to go there in large numbers to help them rebuild. Just like they did in South Florida after Hurricane Andrew 30 years ago. Just like they did in my hometown of Los Angeles after the Northridge earthquake. And just like they did after that recent big flooding like 5 or 6 years ago in Houston, Texas that occurred. Migrants come in large numbers. They work in the areas that are devastated, like after Hurricane Katrina in North Carolina and New Orleans, and they help rebuild after the fact.
So one of the funny things I frequently see you tweet is that you've seen a military-aged male someplace. Now that's in response to the argument these military-age males are entering the country. A broader claim about that is that it's a deliberate, coordinated effort to get these people into the country on behalf of, for instance, the Chinese. Maybe George Soros is involved. Do you see any evidence when you're looking at data that there's a coordinated effort to get military age males into this country for some nefarious operation.
Nothing. I mean, zero. I mean, it is the example of like the goofiest conspiracy theory I've ever seen. Like the reason why they say military aged male. I mean, another way to put it is like prime age workers. You know, people who are younger, people who work, and typically migrants when they first arrive, like in a family, it's the men who come first. They come first, they get a job, they find an apartment for their families to come later and to join them. And this has been the case for migration for long periods of time. And that's what we're seeing now. I mean, the Chinese asylum seekers coming to the border are an embarrassment to the Chinese government because these people are fleeing totalitarian communism for a better life in a much freer country in the United States. Like these are an embarrassment. Um, in any large pool of people, right, especially men, you're going to have some criminals in any large group of people, right? I mean, that's just statistically is going to happen because men commit crimes, especially men, right? But a coordinated large scale effort, like, give me a break. It's a joke. Like, I'd love to see some evidence of that from anywhere. And then what's the plan, right? They come in and they work and pay taxes, and some of them become criminals at some point. Like, what's the plan? Usually this is wrapped up in talk about like invasions. Like there's an invasion going on. And I just can't help but laugh. Like we saw an invasion that happened in Ukraine with Russia in February of 2022 with artillery and tanks and missiles and airstrikes and people with rifles shooting each other and like blowing things up. We don't see anything like that on the US border. We see a little bit of crime here and there. We see some chaos here and there. We see women and children and some men who are trying to enter the United States to work and for a better life. We don't see tanks rolling across the Rio Grande. So this is just like another way in which politics and this political debate have really degraded the English language by turning the word invasion into something that has like to illegal immigration, which they're not the same. It's absurd. And it really kind of makes me mad. Like I like the English language. I think that it's a beautiful language. I think it's very expressive language. But I also think that words have meaning. And to turn the word invasion into meaning like people crossing the border illegally to look for a job is just like a degradation and misuse of this really wonderful language that we have.
Okay, so there's no conspiracy to have illegal military age males spearhead a coordinated invasion. But what about the notion that Democrats want immigrants in for voting? And even if it's not coordinated, what are the chances that illegal immigrants are voting in our elections, whether they be local or statewide or national?
Uh, Very, very small. So there's been a bunch of research trying to take a look into this. There's probably a handful of individuals who have. You know, it's a big country. There are 12 million plus illegal immigrants. Maybe somebody somewhere has probably done that sometime, right? It's just like it has to have happened. The chance that it has happened in any serious numbers is just like a joke. I mean, the number of individuals identified by Hans von Spakovsky who are non-citizens voting illegally in American elections. He works at Heritage, by the way, in this like voter voting working group to try to fix things. It's like in the low couple hundreds over the last several decades. That's just like not a threat.
Not swaying
Um,
any elections, no.
no elections are being swayed by this in any way. These migrants who are coming in do not have a path to citizenship. They don't have a path to a green card. They don't have a path to be able to eventually legally vote in the United States. So it's like just the most exaggerated problem I think one of the most exaggerated problems I've ever encountered in here. Now, some local jurisdictions in some states allow non-citizens to vote in a handful of local elections. There's some of these in Maryland because under a constitution, states have a lot of power over voting rules. So some local jurisdictions in like College Park, Maryland, allow some non-citizens to vote for local elections. There's a few in California and a few in New York that allow that for some local elections. But it is by no means. It is basically, if you were to line up all the jurisdictions that allow them to vote in the US, you're talking about a fraction of 1%. And it's only local elections. And you better believe very few take advantage of it. Because if there's one thing that non-citizens don't want to do, is they don't want to break the laws so that they can be arrested and deported from the United States.
Well, that's a good point. Okay, since I have you here, I have to ask you about this situation in Springfield, Ohio.
Yeah.
Uh, First of all, I mean, just to get the ridiculousness out of the way, the idea that Haitians are over there eating the pets or the cats or anything, as a long-term advocate of immigration, that's gotta piss you off, I would imagine.
I don't think pissed off is the right term. It's just like befuddling because I've seen lots of criticisms of immigration over the years. I've never encountered the criticism that they're eating your pets. And so that was just befuddling, especially with zero evidence. The only evidence that we saw was a video of a native-born American woman several hundred miles away on the other side of the state who was arrested by a police officer who was asking her if she ate a cat. And this woman was like clearly insane, right? So that was the only image before. The other image was of a black man holding a dead goose in a town that wasn't Springfield. And somehow that's evidence of them of Haitians killing cats and dogs. It turns out that man was a black native-born American who had found some dead geese. And under Ohio law, if you find some dead animals, you can take them. It's like roadkill. And then the other image that came up was gathered by Chris Rufo. It was in a town about 25 miles away from Springfield, and it looked like some chickens on a barbecue with cats walking around.
I've
And the
seen that
guy
one.
taking pictures of this was like, "Oh, there's cats on the grill." And it's like, they look like chicken claws. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, it's chickens. So no arrests by the Springfield Police Department of a Haitian killing cats and dogs and eating them. Um, the only complaint that was filed about this was by a woman who then said, "Oh, she lost her cat, and it turns out it was just living in her basement." And there was a recent arrest of a man for killing geese. The man was a white native-born American who for arrested for illegally killing geese. So this is just an example of, frankly, people making things up and lying and spreading rumors and videos that have nothing to do with Haitians eating pets. And what's remarkable is the vast majority of Americans of Haitian descent, they live in Florida, in South Florida. If you were to hear stories about Haitian migrants stealing people's cats and dogs and eating them, you would have heard about it in South Florida, not in some small Midwestern town.
But
So it's absurd. It's infuriating.
is there a legitimate issue that's taken place in Springfield? Is the town being overwhelmed by migrants?
So there's definitely been an increase in the number of Haitians. Some people have said 20,000. People in the town and the town officials are saying 12 to 15. The government data that's out there does not support that. So it could be like a data problem. It takes time for these data to be collected. They're not asking the right questions, maybe. I took a look at data in the school district for the number of students enrolled. It really didn't go up. The school system doesn't ask questions on like, where the kids are from in terms of immigration, but they take like English second language. If you're learning a second language, those numbers didn't go up that much. The number of black students in Springfield didn't go up that much. So I'm just like curious what's going on. So I think there's definitely been an increase, but not 20,000. And there do seem to be, some issues when there's a large number of people who come into a new place at a new time. But a lot of the issues tend to be that they're renting real estate at higher prices, which are driving up the prices, which is a benefit, of course, to the native-born Americans who own the real estate. There's also maybe some issues with like driving, maybe like poor drivers on the streets. In fact, a local Haitian community, somebody who represents part of the community, I think he's a preacher at a church, was saying like, yeah, we need driver's lessons, like to be able to drive better, right? So there's probably some things like that that are going on, like there is in any town when large numbers of new people move in. But it's not like some destruction of this town. It's not like it's being overrun, and it's not like everybody's going to be speaking Creole in the you know, next couple of years, right? So, yeah, there are legitimate issues about immigration that I wish people were talking about. And maybe some changes in policies that can make these things a little bit easier and lower the costs and increase the benefits. Um, but they're definitely not, but one of the costs is definitely not that they're coming in to eat your cats and dogs.
Where where do the bulk of Americans, like where do they stand on immigration? Do they really want a border wall, for instance? Do they want it liberalized? How are Americans looking at this?
I mean, you can pick any poll and get any answer you want on this type of stuff. What I think is there's definitely been an increase in people who want more restrictions in the last several years. And you see this across every poll. And I think you see it because of the chaos along the border. People see chaos, they see things out of control, and their response is to want to crack down and to put more border patrol and more walls there. But if we have a couple years of low numbers of illegal immigration like we've had the last several months, much less border chaos, I think we're about to see a reversal of that. You know, we're going to start seeing people become a little bit more, tolerant of immigration and want to liberalize it. I think people are very upset about illegal immigration. I think they like legal immigration, but they sometimes lump them together.
All right. So do you think we've covered everything? Is there anything that we should have covered that we did not?
I think we covered an enormous amount of time of space in a very short amount of time. This is very efficient.
That's awesome. All right. So where can people find you?
So you can find me on Cato's website. That's cato.org. You can see our research there on immigration. Or you can find me on Twitter at Alex Nowrasteh. That's at AlexNowrasteh. And you can follow me there.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being with us today. I really enjoyed the discussion.
Hey, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. And thank you again for having me on.
It's been great. For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. Till next time.